Today in Final Fantasy, we get a counterspell that seems designed to be busted in cEDH, some Moogles, a Cactaur, and so much more. Let's break it down. Hello everyone, it's Seth, probably better known as Saffron Olive, and it's time for another daily dose of Final Fantasy spoilers. So as we move through week 3 of spoiler season, we got some pretty interesting cards to talk about today, which means we should probably jump right into it. Start talking spicy new Final Fantasy cards. Before we do, a couple of quick reminders. First, if you need any of these cards, you can snag them from our sponsor Card Kingdom over at cardkingdom.com/MTGGoldfish. Second, to keep up on all the latest spoilers throughout the day, you should head on over to MTGpreviews.com. Anyway, let's talk some Final Fantasy. First up today, we get an interesting new rare counter spell in Louisoux Sacrifice. So it's a 1-mana instant. It says counter target activated ability, triggered ability, or non-creature spell. However, as an additional cost to cast the spell, you gotta either sack a legendary creature or pay 2. So Louisoux Sacrifice, this card's very interesting to me. If you think about what this is, if you can sacrifice a legend, the card's kind of busted. Then it's a 1-mana stifle plus a 1-mana negate, which is just absolutely ridiculous. If you have to pay 3 mana for it, it's basically a worse disallow, right? Disallow does the same thing, except it can counter any spell, not just non-creature spells, along with doing the stifle-y stuff. At 1 mana, the comparisons are kind of Spell Pierce and Offer You Can't Refuse, Swan Song, and I do think this is better, right? Like, you're not giving your opponent treasures or a bird. Your opponent can't pay 2 to get around it, but that's assuming you have a legendary creature to sacrifice. So Louisoux Sacrifice, maybe the best comparison is actually Fierce Guardianship. That's actually the card it reminds me of most, and I think this is mostly a commander card, although it could have some standard or even modern implications. But if you think about Louisoux Sacrifice and Fierce Guardianship, they're cards that, if you have your commander out, you can cast really cheaply. Fierce Guardianship is free, your commander is going to be a legend, so you could always sacrifice it to Louisoux Sacrifice and cast it for 1 mana. On the other hand, if you got to cast it for 3 mana, it's not great. Then you're getting a 3-mana negate, you're getting a worse disallow for 3 mana, but it's not prohibitively expensive. It's not like Force of Will, for example, where if you're not using its alternate cost, it's 5 mana, which is just so much mana. So it's still castable, but not especially exciting if you gotta spend 3 for it. So I think this card is probably gonna be most exciting in cEDH, actually. And I'm not gonna go super deep here because I'm not like a cEDH meta expert or anything, but I know that Rograk is really heavily played in cEDH, mostly because it's a 1-mana commander that turns on your Fierce Guardianships and Deflecting Swats and Deadly Erolic, so you partner it with Silas and Ren or Thrasios or whatever, and I think that Louisoux Sacrifice would fit in really well there. In any deck that's playing Rograk, you have this 0-mana legend that you can play, you can sacrifice it to Louisoux Sacrifice to get it for only 1 mana, and then it lines up pretty well with the cEDH meta, where you're able to stifle Thassa's Oracle trigger, the most popular win con. You can stop powerful spells like Ad Nauseam. So I think in those Rograk-style cEDH decks, the card's probably very, very good. In Casual Commander, I think the card is just okay. It's got upsides and downsides, so obviously gonna be at its best in some sort of legendary theme deck. In a Casual Commander deck, yes, you can sacrifice your commander to make this cost 1 mana, but do you really want to? Do you want to sack your Jodah and have to recast it for 7 mana? Not really. So it's going to be at its best in a deck that has cheap legends around. The upside in Casual Commander compared to cEDH is if you just cast this for 3 mana, it's actually kind of fine. Casual's a lot slower than cEDH, and Disallow is not like a staple really, but it does see play. So even at 3 mana, this isn't bad. So if you think of this as like a slightly worse Disallow that some percentage of the time you're going to be able to cast for 1 mana by sacking a legend with a death trigger, one that you don't care about, I think this card can actually be pretty good in Casual as well. As far as standard is concerned, we know that stifle effects can be effective because people play Tashana's Tidebinder. I know you get a body too, so it's not a perfect comparison. The question for this card I think is twofold. So one is this better than Spell Pierce or Negate? Is the upside of getting into Tashana's Tidebinder enough to make it worth playing more for your counter spell, assuming you can't sacrifice a legend, compared to Spell Pierce or Negate? And the answer is probably not, especially in our current standard that's just so fast. Like, Spell Pierce sees a lot of play right now, because whether you're on the play or on the draw, you're going to be able to counter the Corey Steel Cutter, and that's something that Louisoux Sacrifice doesn't really offer, so I'm not sure how good it's going to be there. The other issue I have in standard is if you look at the 50 most played creatures in the format, the top 50, the cards that you're seeing right now, those are the only legends on the top 50 list. So out of the top 50, there's like 8 creatures that are legendary. And honestly, how many of these creatures would you be okay with sacrificing to reduce the cost on Louisoux sacrifice by 2? And the answer is really maybe Lorna the Third Path, maybe a Tursa in some cases, but you're really not going to want to like sack your Sheoldred or your Elish Norn or your Shiko or your Atraxa just to reduce the cost on your Counterspell by 2, especially when you could just play a Spell Pierce or a Negate and get like 90% of the functionality without having to sacrifice anything or pay more mana. The good news for this card in Standard is the Final Fantasy set has an absurd amount of legendary creatures, and it's got a bunch of cheap legendary creatures. So maybe there's a deck that's built around these legends or is playing enough legends that you can actually play this and like in the late game sack a Zakfair or a Freya or something that you just don't really care about that much because it's not doing anything. Plus we have some legends with death triggers like Ariath, where maybe sacrificing a legend could actually be an upside rather than a drawback. So maybe this will look a lot different in the context of Final Fantasy Standard. The place I'm more excited about this is honestly in Modern. If you look at Modern, you got decks playing Ragavan, Tamiyo, Emry Lurker of the Lock. You still have the problem of, is this better than just playing a Spell Pierce or these other 1-mana counters that you can already play in the format? That's going to be the question, but there's many more cheap and often sacrificable legends in older formats than there are in Standard itself. Plus, once you get back to Modern, you get the upside of being able to stifle a fetch land, which turns this into 1-mana land destruction, which is actually pretty powerful in some matchups. So Louisoux Sacrifice, I really like the design of this card. My expectation is that this is a card that gets better the further back in Magic you go format-wise, like better in cEDH, better in Modern than it's going to be in Standard or in Pioneer, but we'll have to wait and see. Maybe there's enough legends in Final Fantasy that this will look pretty good in Standard. Maybe the format will slow down a little bit, where if you have to cast the 3-mana mode, it's not the end of the world, but right now with Standard being so fast, I don't think this beats out Spell Pierce, but in Modern or in cEDH, I think this card is actually a legit bomb that is going to see a ton of play, and depending on its price, might be a pretty good pickup for the Commander format. We also got a bunch of lower rarity cards to cruise through today, starting with Magitek Infantry, a 1-mana 1/1 artifact creature robot soldier, but it gets +1/+0 as long as you control another artifact, and then you can pay 3 to tutor another copy of it onto the battlefield tapped. Does not break the you can only play 4 rule, so it's not like a Relentless Rat style effect or Persistent Positioner, so you only have 4 total, but still, you draw one of these, you could theoretically tutor up the other 3 copies with its ability. So Magitek Infantry, kind of intriguing just because if you have an artifact, it's a Savannah Alliance, and we do have the pieces with like Surge Ginger, Ginger Brew to have some sort of artifact-based aggro deck. So in some sort of artifact aggro deck, I think this card could serve a purpose. That deck doesn't really exist as a competitive deck right now. We'll have to see what it looks like after Final Fantasy, but I do think there's some chance this could see Standard play just as a reasonable beater in an artifact deck that offers some sneaky card advantage upside. We also got Sorceress Schemes, a 4-mana sorcery. This is return target instant or sorcery card from your graveyard or exile with flashback to your hand at a red mana, and then you can flash it back for 5 mana. So Sorceress Schemes, this card's notable because it's very similar and in some ways actually better than Mystic Retrieval. And Mystic Retrieval is a card that sees a reasonable amount of play in Spellslinger commander decks. Mizzet of the Niv Magus, Vadrik, Melik, and now this is also even better in flashback decks because if you're playing Savine or something, you can snag a flashback card from exile. So I think this card will see Commander play in Spellslinger decks, and the other upside of this card in Commander is it's mono red. With Mystic Retrieval, you had to be Izzet to play it, so this gives you something similar to Mystic Retrieval that you can play in Ouroboros. You can play it in Zada and get back another spell to target your Zada and keep the fun going, or Burgi or Ragnota. So I think this card in Spellslinger style Commander decks actually should be pretty good and see a reasonable amount of play. We also got a new Chocobo creator in Gysahl Greens. It's a 2-mana sorcery with flashback of 7. This is create a 2/2 green bird creature token with whenever a land you control enters, the token gets +1/+0 until end of turn. So essentially, it has landfall. So this card could be relevant in some sort of Chocobo landfall deck. We have the pieces, we have the curve to build a deck that's like Zaz Chocobo into Gysahl Greens, into Traveling Chocobo, and make a land drop, and your stuff gets super huge, super quick. Will this deck be competitive? Nah, we'll have to wait and see. But I think this does serve an important curve filling role in the Chocobo deck in Standard. We also got a new Moogle, which seems pretty good in Delivery Moogle. So a 4-mana 3/2 flyer, so actually kind of reasonable stats, not like insane stats, but reasonable stats. And then when it enters, you search your library and or graveyard for an artifact card with mana value 2 or less. Reveal it, put it in your hand. If you search your library, you gotta shuffle. So Delivery Moogle, it's essentially a Tribute Mage and a Trinket Mage stat pulled together. You gotta pay 1 more mana, so that is a downside, but you get a much better body is a 3/2 flyer. So Tribute Mage and Trinket Mage, these cards have seen play in the past in decks that are looking to tutor up a very specific artifact. So in Standard right now, I don't think this card's like a staple, but there are some powerful artifacts that I can see a deck wanting, like a Collector's Cage. We have decks that are really built around trying to use this to sneak something big into play. We got Agatha's Soul Cauldron combo decks. I can see a mill deck with River Churn Monument, really needing the Monument to exhaust and win the game. It even just finds Corey Steel Cutter, probably too slow to be in the competitive Corey Steel Cutter decks, but those are the kind of decks that I could see wanting Delivery Moogle in Standard, are decks where you have one artifact that's like, if I find this, I'm going to pull really far ahead, I'm going to win the game on the spot. That's where Delivery Moogle can come through. As far as Commander is concerned, I actually like this card quite a bit. So again, it's 1 more mana compared to Tribute Mage or Trinket Mage, but you get extra flexibility out of this. This can get your Isochron Scepter, your Steronic Resonator, or a Soul Ring, or a Skull Clamp, or a Thopter Foundry. So it's kind of a more flexible but more expensive version of a Trinket Mage or a Tribute Mage. The other intriguing part of this card is it's mono white. So most of these effects that we've seen, they tutor up an artifact, are in blue, but going into white means this could show up in Oswald Fiddlebender, Gandalf the White, Teshar Ancestor's Apostle. These are some commander decks that would really like a Trinket Mage effect, but just aren't in the right colors for it. So Delivery Moogle, I think, worst case, seems like a good commander card for those artifact decks. And if there's a deck built around Agatha Soul Cauldron or something in Standard that just really has defined it, especially if the format slows down a little bit, like right now, Standard's so fast, it's hard to be like, turn 4 Delivery Moogle, turn 5, I'll play my Agatha Soul Cauldron. That might just be too slow in a lot of matchups, but if the format slows down a little bit with bannings or rotation, maybe it could have a home there as well. We also got another Cactuar. This one, not quite as jumbo as the original, but still pretty big for its stats. So it's a 1 mana green plant, and it's a 3/3 with trample. But it says at the beginning of your end step, if this creature didn't enter the battlefield this turn, return it to its owner's hand. So Cactuar, it's an above the curve 1-drop, but you can kind of only use it every other turn because you're going to play it 1 turn, it'll be summoning 6, so I guess it blocks that turn. The next turn you can attack with it, but then it's going to bounce itself back to its hand on your end step, then you'll have to play it again for 1 mana, do it again. Interesting design. Whether or not it's actually good enough, I'm not sure. It kind of reminds me of a card that used to see play somehow in the earliest days of Magic in Spectral Bears. This is kind of the upgraded 2025 edition. Spectral Bears, if it attacked and the defending player didn't have any black cards in play, it didn't untap during your next untap step, which is pretty similar to Cactuar, using it for 1 turn, bouncing it back to your hand. Also kind of reminds me of some other above the curve green 1-drops with a drawback, like Old Growth Dryads, 1 mana green 3/3, but you gotta ramp your opponent. Patchwork Beastie sees some play right now, although it has some upsides where it's milling you before it turns into a creature. Greenbelt Rampager, 1 mana 3/4, but you had to bounce it a few times to make energy to keep it on the battlefield. So is Cactuar actually good enough to see play? And I'm a little skeptical. At first, when Bloomburrow came out, I thought that Mistbreath Elder might be good. I played it in my Frogs deck. That's a 1-drop 2/2 that on your upkeep, you gotta bounce another creature to your hand, or if you don't, you gotta bounce it back to your hand. If you bounce another creature, it gets a counter. So I thought, okay, this works perfect in Frogs, right? I just keep bouncing my stuff. Frogs kind of want that anyway. I replay my cheap Frogs, draw more cards. It turned out that it was actually super clunky, and there was a lot of times when I felt like I couldn't play it because it was just gonna bounce back to my hand. And Cactuar kind of does that all the time. So I don't know. The stats are appealing, but and it's appealing that it dodges Burst Lightning and Cut Down. On the other hand, these effects that bounce back to your hand and you got to keep replaying and you only use temporarily makes me a little skeptical, as does the fact that green is just really bad in Standard. So a cool design, a design that I don't want to write off completely because I could see a world where it was playable, but right now with green being bad, I'd be a little surprised if it took off in Standard. We also have an interesting graveyard card in the the final days. So a 4-mana black sorcery. This says create 2 tap 2/2 black horror creature tokens, but if it was cast from your graveyard, instead create X of those tokens, where X is the number of creature cards in your graveyard, and it has flashback of 6. So this is kind of Mona the Unhollow mixed with Rise of the Varmints if you flash it back. It is annoying that the horrors are going to be tapped, so you can't block with them right away. That is a meaningful downside, but still, if you're playing some sort of graveyard deck like Cruel Somnophage, Urborg Lurewife, just filling your graveyard with creatures, I imagine you could just mill this over, eventually get to 6 mana, flash it back, and make a massive board of zombies. So in the right deck, I think this card could be pretty powerful. My only concern is in Standard right now, because of Omniscience being popular, Abhorrent Oculus being popular, most decks are prepared with some amount of graveyard hate, so how realistic it is to build up a graveyard of, 10 creatures, 15 creatures, and then play this and make a, 30 power board of horrors, I don't know if it's super realistic, but it does seem like a fun build around at least. We also have an interesting new 1-mana artifact in Elixir. So Elixir, 1-mana artifact, it enters tapped, which is actually a huge downside of this card, and then for 5 mana, you can exile it and shuffle all the non-land cards from your graveyard into your library, and you gain life equal to the number of cards shuffled into your library this way. So this reminds me of Elixir of Immortality. Elixir Immortality actually saw play back in its day in control decks, where you just do the control thing, eventually shuffle your graveyard back in, so you could keep doing the control thing, maybe your opponent mills out eventually. The upside of Elixir itself is basically just that you gain way more life, because you also get like a Blossoming Wreath effect or a Zenith Flare. Actually, you don't have a perfect comparison, but with a full graveyard, you could be gaining 10, 15, 20 life. The downside is it's way more to activate, and it enters tapped. With Elixir of Immortality, a lot of times you want to just play it and activate it all in one turn and not leave it sit out on the battlefield to give your opponent an opportunity to blow it up and ruin your plans. So I think maybe Elixir could show up in some sort of control deck. Really, the deal breaker for me, or the thing closest to a deal breaker, is entering tap. That's what makes me skeptical about this card. I think the effect would be really good in a control deck, though. If you're playing Jace and Chico and just playing this super long game, this reset button where you're going to gain 10, 15 life, shuffle all your non-lands back into your graveyard, seems like it could be pretty powerful. Plus, it's a nice hoser if we run into a mill deck. Remember, mill's getting pretty good. There's a lot of good mill pieces in this set. With the Adventureland, we already have Jason Standard. So if mill becomes a thing, this could be your counter play where you play this in your sideboard, and once your opponent mills you a bunch, you're like, all right, I'll just Elixir, shuffle it all back in. Good luck trying to mill me out. So Elixir, I think it's worse than Elixir of Immortality, but we don't have Elixir of Immortality in Standard, so I think it could still serve a purpose. We also got a bit of draft chaff that you can check out over at MTGpreviews.com. Anyway, that brings us to the end of our daily Final Fantasy spoilers for today. So what do you think about today's card? What do you think about that Counterspell? Can it see Standard play? Can it see Modern play? Is it a cEDH staple? Let me know what you think in the comments. Thanks for watching, everyone. I hope you enjoyed it. And I'll be back tomorrow with even more Final Fantasy spoilers. So until then, have an amazing day, and I will talk to you soon. Looking for even more magic? Well, check out yesterday's Against the Odds, where we did some Throne of the God Pharaohing in Standard. And of course, you can find our last spoiler video right here.